Every human being is born with a system of fire, an internal force wired not for comfort, but for conquest. It's not spiritual metaphor, it's biological reality. Inside your brain lives a neurochemical called dopamine, and it doesn't just make you feel good, it makes you move. Dopamine is not about pleasure, it's the neurochemical of pursuit, progress, and effort-based reward. It is the fire embedded deep in the human brain, placed not to make you feel good for existing, but to compel you toward motion, to reward you for the climb, not the comfort. We have misunderstood dopamine as something that merely comes with success, when in fact it is the invisible engine that drives success long before the reward arrives. It does not wait at the finish line. It ignites at the first step, at the moment you choose discipline over ease, responsibility over distraction, obedience over emotion. In the structure of your brain, dopamine flows through ancient pathways, wiring that predates language, systems designed by the Creator to ensure that you would rise, reach, build, and stretch beyond. What the flesh desires, the mesolimbic pathway, the ventral tegmental area, the nucleus accumbens, these are not just anatomical terms. They are sacred circuits. They are highways of holy ambition, placed in you to stir your spirit, to push your body beyond fatigue, to call your soul into the storm where purpose is tested and power is born. These are the circuits that make sacrifice feel satisfying, that make early mornings feel like war and yet make you crave the battle. Dopamine is not the feeling you get after you've won, it's the power that makes you want to win. It's the inner whisper that says, go again. It rewards the pursuit, not just the prize. This is why people fall when they tie their dopamine to external results alone. When the applause fades, so does their fire. When the outcome is delayed, so is their identity. But when dopamine is tied to effort, to struggle, to showing up when it's inconvenient, the drive becomes unbreakable. You rise because rising becomes the reward. You endure because endurance becomes the victory. You sweat, you strain, you suffer, and somehow that suffering feeds you. That is not weakness, that is alignment with divine neurobiology. The world offers counterfeit dopamine, instant, easy, empty. A swipe, a scroll, a bite, a hit, and every time you choose that path, you borrow motivation from tomorrow. You spike, then crash, you feel good, then hollow, but when you delay that spike, when you attach it to effort, to goals written in secret, to progress made in silence, you build something eternal. You are training your nervous system to find joy in obedience. You are not reacting, you are ruling. You are shaping your biology to serve your mission. This is how warriors are built, not by being handed strength, but by earning it through friction, repetition, and deliberate struggle. Dopamine is the currency of forward movement, and your brain listens carefully to where you spend it. Spend it on ease, and ease will own you. Spend it on progress, and purpose will possess you. This is not chemical manipulation. This is stewardship. This is the rightful use of what has been placed in you by design, not to coast, but to conquer, not to settle, but to sacrifice, not to chase pleasure, but to chase purpose with the full power of a mind lit by discipline and driven by the sacred fuel of pursuit. You can train your dopamine system by learning to attach satisfaction to action, not just to outcomes. The brain does not wait until you've crossed the finish line to begin changing. It reshapes itself in real time, responding not only to what you achieve, but how you move toward it. And this is where power lies not in the result, but in the relationship you build with the process itself. Dopamine, the neurochemical of pursuit, is not bound to the outcome. It can be conditioned, trained, aligned to rise in the very act of obedience. When you learn to find reward in effort itself, when you feel satisfaction not from winning, but from moving, from striving, from showing up, you are no longer at the mercy of circumstances. You are free. This is the principle of effort-based reward, and it is holy. It is sacred neurobiology, because it mirrors the pattern of faith. When you act not because you see, but because you believe, when your reward is tied to obedience rather than outcomes, you reflect the very design of how the nervous system was built to grow. The dopaminergic circuits were not placed in you to only spike when the trophy is in hand. They were placed to drive you toward that trophy through suffering, through labor, through sacrifice. This is the biology of the warrior, the prophet, the one who walks into the unknown and says, "This step matters more than the applause." Most people fall because they have attached their dopamine to the result. They wait for the recognition, the validation, the feeling of completion. But if you only allow your brain to feel rewarded once the job is done, you rob yourself of the fuel to keep going when the journey gets long. You will burn out, you will grow bitter, you will resent the process because you have taught your mind that joy is only permitted at the end. But when you teach your brain to crave the act of discipline itself, when the workout, the writing, the studying, the fasting becomes the reward, you are now operating in unstoppable mode. You have rewired your system to release strength every time you obey, and that is a force few can match. The dopamine system is highly plastic. It listens to what you celebrate, so celebrate consistency. Celebrate small, private victories. Celebrate the early mornings when no one sees. Celebrate the effort when your emotions scream no. Celebrate the invisible grind, because that is where the new pathways are formed. That is where the brain begins to say, "This is who I am now," and not a slave to pleasure, not a victim of mood, but a builder, a steward, a soldier who has learned to drink joy from the act of obedience itself. This is how the greatest among us keep going. Their joy is not found in arrival, it's found in alignment. Their reward is not after the fire, it is in the fire. And their mind, trained by truth, by repetition, by sacred discipline, has learned to release power not when the battle is over, but every time they show up ready to fight. Random dopamine spikes from social media, junk food, or passive stimulation weaken your natural motivation circuitry. There is a war being waged inside your nervous system, and most people don't even realize it. Every scroll, every like, every bite of processed sugar is not just a moment of comfort. It is a message to your brain, a training signal. And the signal is clear: reward without effort, pleasure without pursuit, comfort without confrontation. These random spikes of dopamine that come from passive stimulation, social media, digital noise, cheap entertainment, fast food are not harmless. They are rewiring the very system that God placed in you to chase purpose. They are numbing the circuits of hunger, muting the drive that was meant to lift you from survival into significance. The human brain was not designed for constant stimulation. It was designed for challenge, for effort, for real reward earned through discipline and action. Dopamine, at its core, was built to guide you toward what matters, to strengthen the connection between pursuit and fulfillment. But when dopamine is hijacked, when it's triggered repeatedly by meaningless inputs, your internal system of motivation collapses. You no longer crave growth, you crave distraction. You no longer hunger for vision, you hunger for noise. You become chemically satisfied while spiritually starved. This is not weakness. This is biology. Your dopaminergic neurons, especially those in the ventral tegmental area and nucleus accumbens, adapt to your habits. Every time you scroll for 5 seconds of novelty, every time you snack for 5 seconds of flavor, those neurons record the event. Pleasure was delivered with no cost. And so your brain begins to crave ease. It begins to expect pleasure without obedience, dopamine without discipline. The baseline shifts, the motivation to do hard things fades, and what was once a sharp, focused engine becomes dull, distracted, and dependent. But you were not made to be ruled by chemicals. You were made to rule over them. You were made to align them with your mission, to submit your biology to your purpose. This requires war. It requires fasting not just from food, but from false reward, from the things that feel good but make you weak, from the things that light your brain up but dim your vision, because every false spike of dopamine makes it harder to feel joy in the real work. It robs the satisfaction that should come from the run, the repetition, the rising early, the pressing forward. It steals the sweetness from struggle and replaces it with addiction to ease. The only way back is through discipline, through deliberate reduction of the things that flood your brain without asking you to rise. Cold exposure, stillness, intentional boredom, work done in silence, all of it recalibrates your nervous system. It lowers your dopamine threshold. It reminds your brain how to hunger again. It reignites the link between effort and reward. And when that happens, when your circuits are cleansed and restored, the smallest wins begin to feel sacred. The act of showing up becomes powerful. The craving for meaningless spikes is replaced by a drive for meaningful progress. Your system begins to work the way it was always meant to, aligned, awake, and under your command. Deliberate cold exposure, goal setting, and visual focus can increase baseline dopamine over time. There are tools built into your biology, tools that, when used with intention, don't just create momentary spikes in drive, but elevate your baseline. This is the hidden truth of dopamine most people never hear. It's not just about peaks. It's about where your level sits day after day. Because when your baseline dopamine is high, your motivation doesn't fade with emotion, your energy doesn't depend on results, and your discipline doesn't crack under pressure. You begin to move with a fire that's not borrowed from hype or noise. It's generated from deep inside, from circuits trained to serve the mission, not the moment. One of the most powerful ways to elevate that baseline is through deliberate cold exposure. When your body enters cold water, ice, shower, natural elements, the nervous system doesn't just react, it recalibrates. The discomfort sends an urgent signal through your noradrenergic system, releasing adrenaline in the brainstem, sharpening alertness. But more than that, cold exposure causes a sustained increase in dopamine, up to 250% lasting for hours. Not because you earned a reward, but because you faced something hard and stayed. You didn't run, you breathed. You endured, and your brain responded with fire. It said, "This is the path, this is how we grow." This kind of exposure is more than a physical act. It is a declaration, a morning ritual of dominance over the flesh. Every time you enter the cold, your dopamine system receives a new instruction. Reward comes through struggle. And when this becomes a pattern, your baseline rises. You begin to crave intensity. You stop chasing fake highs. You align your chemistry with courage, but cold alone is not enough. You must direct your mind with clear goals. The dopamine system is a targeting mechanism. It needs something to aim at. Without a vision, dopamine disperses and dissipates. But with specific goals written, repeated, visualized, your brain lights up like a circuit board. Every micro-win releases a controlled surge, and every time you move closer, your system says, "Yes, more of this." It's not the size of the goal, it's the clarity. Goals are anchors for your chemistry. They create order inside chaos. They give your biology something to serve. Layered with this is the power of visual focus, using the eyes to guide the brain. When you engage in forward movement while focusing on a specific point in space, the brain engages the nucleus of the optic tract and links vision to action. You train your mind to lock on, to chase, to move toward what matters. This is not a metaphor, it's a protocol. Visual focus triggers the systems that prepare the body for movement and the brain for pursuit. And when paired with effort, this magnifies the dopamine signal. These tools, cold exposure, goal setting, visual engagement, form a trinity of neurological alignment. They tell your nervous system, reward is not given, it is earned. Joy is not found, it is built. Drive is not inherited, it is trained. And when practiced consistently, your baseline dopamine begins to rise. You become stable in storm, hungry in discipline, and energized without escape. Your brain, once passive and reactive, becomes a servant of your highest intention. A system no longer addicted to highs, but conditioned to pursue what is hard, what is holy, what is aligned with legacy. Dopamine works in cycles. Understanding its rise and fall is key to avoiding burnout and building consistency. Dopamine is not just a spark, It's a cycle, a rhythm, a divine pattern built into the brain. And when you understand that cycle, you stop being confused by your own energy swings. You stop calling it laziness when the fire fades, and you stop chasing the next hit when the drive dips. You begin to realize this neurochemical was never meant to stay at its peak. It rises with pursuit, but it must fall to reset. It builds with action, but it must recover with rest. If you don't honor that rise and fall, you burn out the very system designed to carry you toward greatness when dopamine spikes. Whether from a win, a breakthrough, or a powerful training session, it feels like purpose, power, direction, and that's real, but what happens next is just as important. The spike is always followed by a dip. Always, this dip is not failure, it's not weakness. It's the nervous system protecting itself, rebalancing, preparing for the next wave of pursuit. But if you chase another spike immediately through noise, through food, through distractions, you interrupt the cycle. You short-circuit the system, you confuse the brain. You never allow it to reset, and the consequence is fatigue, numbness, and eventually a complete collapse in drive. This is why so many people feel unmotivated after doing something powerful. They don't understand the rhythm. They feel the drop and believe something's wrong, when in fact it's working exactly as designed. The drop isn't a curse, it's an invitation to rest with intention, to reflect, to allow the neurochemistry to return to baseline so it can rise again stronger. This is sacred biology, and the ones who honor it, who work in waves of intensity and rest, who push when it's time and pull back when needed, those are the ones who last. Not for days, not for weeks. For decades, the cycle of dopamine is like the breath of the mind. Inhale, pursuit, drive, effort. Exhale, rest, reflection, reset. And just like breath, if you only inhale, you suffocate. If you only chase spikes without respecting the fall, you destroy the receptors that allow you to feel joy in the first place. But when you work with the cycle, when you rise with intention and fall with wisdom, your system becomes strong, balanced, and unshakable. You are no longer ruled by addiction to achievement. You are no longer afraid of stillness. You begin to crave structure, not chaos, and this is how consistency is built, not from endless fire, but from strategic rhythm. The greatest warriors of the mind are not those who burn the brightest in a moment, but those who master the arc of the cycle, who know when to engage, when to retreat, and how to return, who allow their biology to align with the laws written into creation. Dopamine is not a god to be worshipped, it is a tool to be managed, a cycle to be respected, a system that, when trained with reverence, produces not just intensity, but longevity, sustainability, and dominion over time itself. Layering physical effort with purpose and delayed gratification is the fastest way to rewire your brain for unstoppable drive. The nervous system does not change through words alone. It does not bow to theory. It obeys action, repeated, intentional, embodied action. The fastest, most enduring transformations in human behavior come not from inspiration, but from consistency under pressure. And when that pressure is created through physical effort aligned with a higher purpose and anchored in delayed gratification, something extraordinary happens. The brain rewires itself to crave the very process that once required discipline. It begins to associate effort with reward, pain with meaning, struggle with satisfaction, and that is where true drive is born, not from desire, but from design. This is not metaphor, this is measurable biology. The brain is constantly shaping itself based on the feedback it receives from your behavior. Every time you exert yourself physically, every time you push through a workout, a fast, a cold exposure, a long day of labor, the dopaminergic system is awakened. But that awakening is amplified when the effort is connected to something bigger than self, when your sweat serves a vision, when your strain is not random but reverent, when you carry the weight not just for strength but for service. That is when the circuits of discipline harden into steel. That is when motivation stops fading with mood and starts growing with movement. But there's a second layer to this transformation, the power of delayed gratification. When you resist the urge to self-soothe, when you reject the false reward, when you hold the line and say, "Not yet," your brain begins to recalibrate. It stops craving immediacy. It learns that real satisfaction comes from sustained pursuit. And as you delay gratification repeatedly, you teach your dopamine system to rise during the work, not after it. You build joy into obedience. You find fuel in the friction. You feel fire not in the trophy, but in the training. This process changes the density of dopamine receptors, particularly in the prefrontal cortex and striatum areas critical for goal setting, habit formation, and impulse control. Your ability to focus increases, your ability to persist deepens, your tolerance for discomfort expands. This is neuroplasticity in motion, driven by behavior that honors long-term purpose over short-term pleasure. This is not just hard work, it is holy work because it requires sacrifice. It requires you to deny the flesh, to deny the world's pace, to deny the shallow spike in favor of the deep reward when physical effort, purpose, and delayed gratification are layered consistently. The result is not just more willpower, it's a complete rewiring of the nervous system. You don't need more motivation because you've turned effort into reward. You don't need tricks to keep going because going has become the gift. You don't bounce between highs and lows because your drive is no longer dependent on external validation. It is rooted in something deeper, something eternal, a rewired mind, a reformed spirit, a body in motion, serving a calling that no longer negotiates with comfort or convenience. This is where superhuman drive is born, not the absence of pain, but in the mastery of it. Not in the removal of resistance, but in choosing to rise through it again and again, until your very biology bends to the mission you were created to fulfill.